The U.S. drive to deport hits a new level. Crushing crowds at the U.S.-Mexico border have disappeared, but for those inside the U.S., the controversial crackdown on the undocumented continues. From paying people to leave to seeking deportation deals with Rwanda and Moldova. Will Trump's policies survive the U.S. courts and American public opinion? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's Newsmaker is U.S. deportation. A huge number of Americans supported Donald Trump in his campaign to crack down hard on illegal migrants. But measures being taken to deport them aren't just putting U.S. laws to the test. They're also testing other countries. Panama, for example, agreed to accept hundreds of U.S. deportees, including nationals of Afghanistan and Iran, and is now facing lawsuits for their alleged mistreatment. Add that to legal residents, even U.S. citizens being threatened with deportation or detention, and it's hard to say whether new policies are working or backfiring. Here's a look.
It was one of his many signature campaign promises: deportation of illegal aliens in their thousands. ICE agents swooping in to detain those that Trump officials say are in the US illegally. According to Department of Homeland figures, the US has deported over 150,000 people since Trump took office, though this figure is lower than the 195,000 deported from February to April last year under Joe Biden.
There are currently around 1.4 million illegal aliens who've been ordered removed but remain here in violation of the law. We will aggressively prosecute, consistent with long-standing law, those aliens for failing or refusing to depart.
But in the Trump administration's haste to live up to promises, many legal immigrants and people with proper permission and documentation to stay are getting wrongly caught up in the crosshairs. One such case is that of 31-year-old Venezuelan makeup artist and hairstylist Andre Jose Hernandez Romero. He was in the process of attending a prearranged legal asylum appointment in San Diego when he was detained and later deported by US authorities. US officials claimed tattoos on his wrists proved his membership in a brutal Venezuelan gang. In fact, the tattoos contained religious references to his Catholic faith and a reference to his mother and father, a well-known local Catholic tradition in his Venezuelan hometown. He is now presumed incarcerated in an El Salvador mega prison, his family not hearing from him since he was deported. And he isn't the only one sent to the same notorious El Salvador prison. The White House even going so far as to openly refuse to act on a US court ruling a 29-year-old El Salvador man was deported in error and had to be brought back to the US.
Trump wields the government as a weapon against his enemies. And now he's taking a page out of the book of the dictators and autocrats he admires, like Bukele, and expelling American citizens with no due process.
And in early May, a flight laden with migrants being returned to Venezuela from the US arrived without a 2-year-old girl on board, who was separated from her mother a week earlier when her mother was being deported. The decision of US authorities to leave the minor with a foster family in the US has raised alarm among human rights lawyers about US deportation policies. Even more worryingly for many in the US, Trump's apparent casual insouciance over whether he is required to follow the US Constitution.
Your Secretary of State says everyone who's here, citizens and non-citizens, deserve due process. Do you agree, Mr. President?
I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know.
Well, the Fifth Amendment says
I don't know. It seems it might say that, but if you're talking about that, then we'd have to have 1 million or 2 million or 3 million trials.
The most recent major development, a proposal from the US President himself that people in the US illegally could be offered payments of $1,000 to self-deport. as the Republicans relentlessly pursue their anti-immigrant and deportation agenda, is the Constitution itself at risk? And if it is, what cost is the American public prepared to pay?
So, is ridding the U.S. of undocumented migrants working out the way Americans wanted? And what could be the long-term legal implications, both in the U.S. and abroad? Well, joining me now to debate that and much more are from Atlanta, Policy Director for the ACLU of Georgia, Christopher Bruce. From Washington, Associate Policy Analyst at the Migration Policy Institute, Colleen Putzel-Kavanaugh. And also from Washington, former U.S. Secret Service agent and Sergeant at Arms of the Maryland Republican Party, Barry Donadio. Thanks all so much for being with me. Christopher, I'll start with you. What's happening here? Is Trump simply doing what he was elected to do and maybe a few kind of innocent people are being thrown under the bus, or is this a complete breakdown of legal protections?
And that's really the question. If you look at Democrats or Republicans, both have deported undocumented immigrants. President Obama has deported the most amount of undocumented immigrants amongst any president. Biden has followed suit. So deporting undocumented immigrants is not really the one at the issue. Now, when you deport U.S. citizens, or when you deport people that the judicial branch has told you specifically not to deport, that is really the issue that comes into play. And that is what President Trump has done. Unfortunately, he has done not what people elected him to do. He is curving the Constitution altogether. So he is instituting fear within our system of saying, just because you do deserve to be here, even if you are a U.S. citizen, you may be under attack. You may be picked up at some time. You may not be afforded due process. He has just been on a statement this past Sunday talking about due process is an inconvenience. Well, that's one of the reasons why the founders of the U.S. Constitution has put it in there for us not to have a king or a tyrant deciding what is easy or convenient. So the scary part about this is everyone is under jeopardy. When you stop listening to the Constitution, when you stop listening to your equal judicial branch, then U.S. citizens may be under attack as well.
Okay. But Colleen, I mean, the wider kind of Trump-supporting public in particular might look at or listen to what Christopher is saying and say, well, you know what, it's just maybe a few dozen out of the thousands that are suffering some sort of injustice here. You know, the U.S. citizens that have been hit, the legal residents that have been hit. But, I mean, is that the case? Are they correct in believing so? That, again, as I said, just a few might be kind of thrown under the bus and lose their rights, but for the wider picture, it's still a good thing?
Well, you know, right now the Trump administration is seeking every avenue to achieve their goal of 1 million deportations per year. And in achieving that goal, they're coming up against many, many barriers, which we knew existed even before the Trump administration came into office. Deporting people from the interior, carrying out deportations to countries that don't readily accept deportees, or even just deporting at that pace. As Christopher said, Obama is the leading deporter in terms of having the most numbers. Biden followed suit. But I think an important caveat there is that the majority of the Biden deportations came from the US-Mexico border. Right now, President Trump is trying to deport people mostly from the interior due to the reduction in migrant flows to the US-Mexico border. Those deportations face a lot of barriers, but in trying to achieve this goal, in trying to get over the hurdles of deportations, the Trump administration is seeking to use really any avenue at its disposal, including targeting foreign students, including the US citizens that are getting caught up in these deportations. And so what we're seeing is an effort to try to reach that number. It's a numbers goal for this administration.
Barry, are U.S. voters, Trump supporters, Republicans, are they getting what they voted for?
Yes, absolutely. Trump supporters are applauding every move the president is making right now. We have to remember that the president declared an emergency on the border. It's in his executive actions when he first took office, where he actually proclaimed the Alien Enemies Act. That gives certain emergency powers to the U.S. government to bring people before a judge and have them removed. It's all stated in U.S. code. There is a process. There is a legal process, and it is being followed. You're seeing exactly why he's been voted in. There's millions of people here in the United States that just they paid an illegal organization to get here, and they're among us. And some of them, not all, but some are participating in a criminal enterprise that is putting many of us in danger, and it is draining our resources. And people want to know why hospitals cost so much money. Well, there's undocumented people going and getting free medical care while the rest of us have to pay the unpaid bills. And that's why many Americans are very unhappy with this. So voters for Donald Trump, and I would argue that a lot of Democrats are quite happy with this as well. The other thing we have to remember, we hear talk of President Obama and President Biden, they deported more people. These were deportations, in my understanding, that took place literally at the border. People were trying to come in or captured right there at the border and sent back immediately. The Trump deportations are much more bang for the buck. These are people that are already in the country. They have a criminal record for the most part. These are the ones that they're actually going to get. They're in New York. Pick a state. They're all over the place, and they're being deported. So that's what it is.
Okay, Christopher, then back to the beginning. I mean, like, why do you think Barry and like-minded people like Barry don't understand that this isn't good for the United States?
Well, I'll pick up respectfully where Barry just left off. 5 days ago, the Aliens Enemies Act, the one that President Trump had just instituted, was struck down by a federal court, saying that it's completely illegal and the president shouldn't do that. So again, he's putting in place illegal measures and using executive orders when they should not be done. He's invoking old laws that were used for, such as the Alien Enemies Act, armed and organized institutions to actually put out his favor. And our judges and our courts are going in front of him and saying, you cannot do this. There is a due process clause that happens within it. While you had others like President Obama and Biden who were still challenged in the courts. This is going to happen. But no other president has been in this way so reckless within doing these type of natures. Let me tell you, one American being deported illegally is too much. You should never put anyone's rights at stake at this time. The bang for the buck comes with the Constitution. And it is wholeheartedly disappointing to hear that anytime the Constitution can be shredded or ripped a little bit might actually be a problem. So right now, we need to make sure that all Americans come together and say, we have a system of justice that needs to be adhered to. Do not try to use any type of other type of laws in some obscure type of way to deport individuals. We need to uphold due process.
Okay, let me come back to Colleen then, because it still feels like a lot of Americans aren't going to be convinced by the due process argument and why it's a foundation of, the Constitution and the balance of power. So do you think it'll come down to those fewer cases, but still significant cases in the treatment of U.S. citizens? For example, those coming in at the border saying they're being searched, for example, with no cause, their phones are being confiscated, sometimes confidential emails are being read. We know there was this case recently of a Lebanese American, but a U.S. citizen, a Trump supporter, going public saying he almost actually died after police grabbed him with no cause at the Canadian border, treated him, he says, terribly. And he says Trump wasn't supposed to do this to me, and now he's understanding the rule that, I guess, arguable rule, sorry, Barry, that, I watched it happen to my neighbor, I didn't speak up, and now they're coming for me.
Right. I mean, we are hearing about a lot of these high-profile cases, and we will continue to hear about these high-profile cases, and those are the ones that garner a lot of attention. Those are the ones that are sort of, in the news. But I think that to the point of due process, it is a part of our legal system. It's a part of our immigration system, and it's a foundational part of it that people have the right to a judge. Even the use of the Alien Enemies Act allows for judicial review, and yes, it was struck down, but prior, the people people who were sent to El Salvador were not given the option of judicial review. And so I think that it's very important to remember that within the laws that we have, within the immigration laws that we have, there is access to due process that must be followed. And at the same time, the Trump administration is currently firing immigration judges in an already very constrained system. We had about 700 immigration judges at the end of last fiscal year, and several dozen, if not more, have been fired since. And so we have an already very backlogged system that needs to be addressed that is now being further dismantled. So it will make it harder and less timely to go about the judicial process, but avoiding the judicial process is not the answer.
Okay, Barry, avoiding the judicial process is not the answer, but it seems like that's what the administration feels it can do at this point in the interest of what Americans voted for.
Yeah, I would like to know what case everybody's talking about, where the administration is simply not following law. There are attorneys. The White House has an attorney general. I don't think the administration is just simply not following the law. Otherwise, I think, we all know Donald Trump does extreme measures. I think you would see quite a few other things being done if he was just blatantly not following the law. So, we're hearing in this interview about how somehow, some way, federal law is disputable by a judge. Maybe who it's applied to. I understand that argument. And your other guests are very articulate and they're very smart. But at the end of the day, we're talking about a law, the Alien Enemies Act, that has been law since the 1700s. We heard not a peep of any objection to this law of any president prior, only now because it's being used, and they don't like the way it's being used.
Yeah, but I think most kind of forgot about it, thought it wasn't enough of an issue, probably just felt it could never be invoked again.
Well, around the same time, we've had the Second Amendment, which is law too, around that same time period in the 1700s, but it's alive and well. We all have the ability to have weapons and protect ourselves. So this is just yet another law. And by the way, freedom of speech is right there too.
Let me ask you though, Barry, would you maybe at least concede that there's a lack of clarity on how far laws can be pushed, really, which can encourage abuse by agents on the ground? They have no clear borders. Go ahead.
Right. So, I agree with every single person on the panel. If an American is accidentally deported somehow, there's liability there, and there has to be. So the government has to make absolute certain that anybody that they're taking an action against, especially an immigration action, has to be somebody that is here illegally under Title 18 U.S. Code, which has been there all along. So if you're here illegally, or if I go to any country uninvited and I'm there illegally, I would expect to be deported, probably put in jail, charged with a crime, and then deported. I don't know why that would be different here in the United States.
Well, because these people are claiming asylum. When you have people coming from countries that are
Yeah,
sure, but some of them have now kind of fallen through the cracks, aren't getting the chance even to engage fully in the process. And as you know, people have also been taken out that were in that process.
Yeah, I disagree in part with there's no process, and I disagree that somebody doesn't have the ability to seek asylum. I believe that still exists, as far as I know, unless something changed in the last 24 hours. But people, bad actors also try to use this as a tool. So where do we draw the line? Now, all of us here in the United States are immigrants, but we came here legally.
Okay.
It is a big difference. Yeah.
Yeah, Christopher, I'm not seeing you disagreeing, shaking your head or anything. I'll move on to the next point then, really, because now the next level of trying to get undocumented people out of the country is to pay them a stipend. To leave voluntarily. Is that an effective way forward? Do you find it controversial? Will taxpayers like that? And will those who actually do choose to take that route, will they get the chance to reapply as they've apparently been guaranteed?
Well, let me start off with, I do disagree. Okay, let me go on the record and say it first. Second, an example which we have all heard of is an individual being deported to El Salvador who has specifically been said by the courts, do not deport this person, and they're gone. And now they are sitting in a prison, a gulag more likely, in El Salvador, and the administration is not facilitating their release. They are just letting them sit there. Again, due process was not done in this example. When it comes to stipends or paying people to leave the country, when you have a president who has implemented measures to fire individuals from the federal government to put our national security at risk and our readiness to serve the American people with their taxpayer dollars, and now you're going to give people a stipend to leave, I just do not think that's great policy at all. Again, the thing I want to lift up the most is due process. Individuals seeking asylum under our laws should be granted asylum, not just our laws, international laws as well. If we stick to a system that has worked for literally decades, then we can get through this type of issue. Giving out money to people who are undocumented to leave the country is not the solution. The solution is sticking to the laws that we do have and done it in an administrative way where all fairness is being upheld.
Okay, let me ask Colleen though, because now that we've looked at the potential, not the potential, the legal issues that are arising from all of this in the U.S. I mentioned earlier that they also have problems leaking into into countries abroad, where third countries are now taking U.S. deportees, including Panama. Panama is now facing backlash, especially from having taken, I think, around 300 people. Their public and their legal authorities say they're wrongly detaining. In some cases, they're actually accused of abusing asylum seekers. So you have people, again, from countries like Afghanistan and Eritrea who have rights under international law to seek asylum in the United States, yet here they are being deemed dangerous in countries like Panama and left with no legal means whatsoever.
Right. So there are many people in sort of this legal limbo right now, and sending third country sending migrants of third countries to other countries has been done before. It's not necessarily a new or novel idea, but what happens here is, what's the through line? Where are people going to be able to access protections in Panama? Is Panama responsible for those deportations? Is the U.S. paying for those deportations? And so the exact plans that are in place aren't entirely clear in terms of what happens next. So there are people flown to Panama. That much was made very clear. And what happens next for these people is quite unclear at this point. And if I could just double back for 1 second to the stipend that's being offered, I think it's important to note, and I'm not sure, there's this stipend is being offered in conjunction with an ad campaign to really encourage people to self-deport if they can. But I think the important point to be made is that it's really a case-by-case basis if people could come back to the U.S. legally. It really depends on what their current status is, if they have a pending immigration application, because leaving could trigger a 3 or 10-year bar on reentry, or it could cause a case to be abandoned in the immigration court. And so I think that, this has been tried. The Biden administration did look for funding in previous funding measures to try something like this. It wasn't necessarily funded, or it wasn't a program that came to life. But I think that this idea isn't new or novel either. It's been tried in many countries in Europe, but just an important point there.
Yeah. Barry, I'll tell you what, we just have a couple minutes left, and I need to ask you, just as someone who supports this policy and how it's being carried out, do you ever worry about the effect it's actually having on even legal visitors, to the United States, and the opinion of people outside of the U.S., especially when it's now known and being reported on that, your phone can be searched if you're just coming as a tourist, a legal tourist, searching for messages that are potentially incompatible with U.S. foreign policy. I know several people that are now hesitating to go to the U.S. for both vacation and for business because they just fear that they're going to be subject to unfair practices with no legal clarity on what they have to succumb to and what they don't.
Well, look, you're subject to a search every time you get on a plane, right? So this falls under the U.S. law. We have a visitor coming in, they can potentially be searched. Now, if they're using provisions of the law to search a phone, or if it's a provision to have their visa, and part of that agreement is to have their phone searched, then so be it. But at the end of the day, voters want this. This is the majority of the people of the United States who voted for Donald Trump want these actions. And some people may disagree with the way Trump does it, and I completely understand that. But the bottom line is, we heard before that the immigration system is working. Well, guess what? It hasn't been working. It hasn't been working since I was a kid, and I'm 54 years old. And quite frankly, people have been just fed up with it. So that's why they voted for Donald Trump. It's simply because the last administration allowed up to 11 million illegal aliens into this country. And that's where we're at. This is how we got here. Now, as far as people not wanting to come to the United States, I know a lot of people that want to come to the United States and have no problem having their phone searched or their body searched to come into the United States and live in the best country in the world legally.
Okay. Barry, that'll have to be the final word. Very unfortunately, we're out of time for this edition of the Newsmakers. I'd like to thank all three of my panelists so much for being with us, our viewers for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on social media, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.